Human trafficking of the poor is, it seems, less talked about than the terrible living and working conditions that they endure day to day, and yet the account you will hear today reveals that this criminal underworld was as much a reality in the past as it is in many parts of the world today. The author of this account wrote in great detail about the horrific traffic in white women in London between the close of the Edwardian era and the pre-war years, to bring it to the attention of both the public and Parliament, in the hope that it would bring about law for the protection of women and girls. Olive Christian Malvery was a journalist concerned with the welfare of women and children. She has a fascinating backstory. Born in Lahore in 1871, now Pakistan, she moved to London in 1900 and trained to be a singer at the Royal College of Music, and supported herself by writing. Awarded a commission for Pearson's magazine, she disguised herself to report on the conditions of all kinds of working-class jobs. The pioneering success of her work allowed her to build 2 shelters for homeless women in London. Her work to improve women's lives cultivated wide public attention, and she was soon asked by a publisher to investigate and report on white slaves, as she now commanded the necessary public respect to reveal such terrible injustices with authority. Initially hesitant about what horrors she would discover, she agreed to the task for the benefit of victims and to seek an end to the traffic in women. The police knew much of what was going on under their eyes, but the law against prostitution and trafficking in place at the time Malvery was carrying out her investigations was woefully inadequate at bringing pimps to justice, also known as bludgers. Victims were often duped and, in the eyes of criminal courts, were therefore seen, in legal terms, to have willfully taken a ship that would lead them thousands of miles from help and into a living hell, while perpetrators never had to justify the source of their ill-gotten gains. You will hear several stories of trafficked women, and viewer discretion is advised, as although what you will hear is not graphic, the author was careful to mute some details given to her by police, and the language she employs deliberately seeks to avoid shock to her audience. It is still a distressing account of the nightmare to which these poor victims were subjected. Before we move on, please consider clicking the subscribe button for more content like this. If you find this video interesting, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a thumbs up and share it widely with friends and family. Please check out the description to see how you can support the channel and the content we make. It is well known in the East, known to those who care to know, known to those who want to know, that many white women and white girls are recruited for trade purposes at Whitechapel and the surrounding districts, the home of the poor, the overworked, the underfed, and the scantily clothed and often brutally used women and girls of several nationalities. I was determined to gather the facts and learn first-hand, so to speak, the methods adopted in London by pimps for filling the vacancies in the ranks of the unfortunates abroad, which death, disease, and mysterious disappearances cause with fearful rapidity. Armed with a letter of authority, I waited on the chief officer at the Whitechapel Police Headquarters in Lemon Street. Once authorised to speak on this fearful subject by their superior officer, the sturdy officers in charge of Lemon Street Station unfolded chapter after chapter of the deadly work of the pimp and his coadjutor, the procuress. Facts, figures, and photographs were shown to me that would convince the coldest and most callous Parliament that ever existed of its duty to spare one day for the subject in their legislative hustle and pass a law to fully protect the mothers and daughters of the nation from the machinations of the fearful pimp. Unfortunately, much that one is told cannot, for diverse reasons, most of them weighty reasons, be told here. In interrogating the authorities at Lemon Street, I was particularly inquisitive as to the doings of a well-known Eastern pimp. When travelling in the East, I have more than once come across the accursed tracks and unwholesome evidence of this notorious pimp, who to this moment trades in human flesh, recruited at Whitechapel, where, I am told, he was born. He is of Polish-Jewish parents who came to this country to escape the awful atrocities in their own. The pimp, being British-born, claims all the rights and privileges of British freedom, equity, and justice. The particular pimp to whom I am now alluding graduated it is said, from the Whitechapel dregs of poverty, and passed through various prisons to his present position as leader in the business of pimping. As a youth, he always firmly declined hard work, and being afraid to steal, beyond petty larcenies, he accepted the first safe job offered to him as a sounder, or nit, that is, general lookout man for a notorious Whitechapel fence. A fence is an individual who buys stolen property, one who controls the dangerous practice of getting onto the market the goods and chattels the burglar commandeers with the aid of the dark lantern and the jemmy. The burglar and the pickpocket are ever ready to inform the police that it is the easiest thing in the world to steal, but the trouble arises when the thief wishes to turn the stolen property into ready cash. So, to effect the sale of stolen property scientifically, the fence has come into being. Most fences who know their business give special attention to placing stolen property abroad. The East for choice, where good prices are obtainable and no questions asked. It was as a sounder for a notorious fence that the pimp I am writing about, he claims many aliases, one being Lavington H, first went into the East. He was a quick-witted and energetic, well-spoken, well-dressed, always in funds. Once in the East, his active brain quickly realized the fact that a big trade and big money were possible in landing white girls in the East for immoral purposes. Therefore, he returned to Whitechapel and his familiar haunts, and entered into league with several noted procuresses, one a notorious old Jezebel who has been regularly sowing the seeds of iniquity for more than 30 years. This old hag, with the assistance of male confederates, spread the good news of Lavington H's arrival from abroad and the splendid future that was in store for girls who would go abroad and marry a real sultan. Lavington H played safety by staying at a first-class hotel in Piccadilly, meeting his agents from time to time by appointment on the Embankment, where arrangements as to the class of girls to be trapped, caught, induced, or, if need be, married for Eastern purposes, were discussed. Sometimes only one girl would be obtainable. At other times, 2 or 3 would be brought into the net at one catch, on one pretext or another, and then shipped off to the East in charge of this pimp. When the white girls were disposed of or suitably placed abroad, the pimp would return for another contingent. On one occasion, this pimp nearly came to grief. His partners in crime had secured for him a very pretty and virtuous girl. She did not find out the life she was expected to lead until the ship was between London and Colombo, Sri Lanka. And then it was the captain of the vessel who warned her. As she rebelled and threatened exposure, the pimp thought it prudent to quietly drop her at Colombo, and she returned to London. The pimp, as I have already stated, combined the selling of stolen property with the selling of white girls in the East. He can always bring to light, as they term it, a fine diamond ring, a diamond pin, a high-class gold watch or 2, watch chains, earrings, bangles, etc., all stolen in England or America and altered in design and made ready for sale in the East. To add to his other accomplishments, this pimp has lots of push and is nearly always to be seen at Eastern carnivals, race meetings, regattas, etc. Such gatherings help him to practice his nefarious tricks in selling stolen goods, but these exploits are only entrees or side dishes compared with the main business of his life, namely the selling of white girls to the highest bidder out East. Last July or August, I forget the exact month, the big race meeting of 1911 was held at Bangkok, Siam, Thailand. This despicable pimp appeared at the gathering, and wearing fashionably cut clothes and diamond rings and pin, he elbowed his way among decent people. A friend of mine, a man whom I have known and trusted for 20 years, saw this pervert of humanity seated in a comfortable armchair on the large, hospitable veranda of the German club at Bangkok. The pimp had more to say than any of the decent men who were gathered in that quiet corner, trying to keep cool on a hot, sweltering day. And in his boastful fashion, he let a ray of light into his fearful trade. Those who knew the East are fully aware that at race meetings or at great carnival gatherings, most of the clubs, especially the great liberal German clubs, throw open their doors in truly friendly fashion to visitors who are at liberty to saunter in and out, drink, play billiards, cards, or bet on races. It was at one of these gatherings that this pimp elbowed himself amongst the horse-racing fraternity, all honest, straight men who work for their living and despise the unclean monster who lives on unfortunate women's earnings. The pimp was busy talking about his own ability when one horse trainer, an Australian, being disgusted with the fellow's talk, stopped him by remarking, "If half one hears is true, the game you're at is a bit over the odds. I know what they would do with your sort in my country." The pimp became indignant and actually defended his trade. He said with much vehemence, "It's all sentimental humbug about girls coming out here. In the first place, they want to come out. In the second place, they know what they are coming for, and they get what they expect. Here, they get money, good clothes, good food, and a good time. If the life is short, it's merry. If they remain in England, well, they get what they are looking for. Without money, or food, or clothes. If I bring a girl out here, I see she knows the business before we start. I am not on this earth to buy trouble, and if a girl is willing to undertake the trip, why should busybodies interfere? The first questions I always ask my sounders, agents who sound and procure the girls, are, does this girl know her business? Has she passed the probationary stages? Does she want change of air, change of climate, good food, and good clothes? If she does, bring her to me, I'll do the rest. I never go near Whitechapel. It's not worth the risk," the pimp added. If a girl is agreeable to go out of England on her own free will, who can stop her? Not the police. They have no power to stop her, nor yet the so-called preventative societies, who live on the game and are not worth thinking about. So, if a woman observes the law and it's a free country whilst she keeps the law, where's the harm? It's the law that rules, not sentiment. Such was the pimp's summing up of the horrible trade, heartless, inhuman, brazen, and defiant. I went primarily to Whitechapel police station to question the authorities about this fellow. Whilst the officers would not commit themselves, it was clear to my mind that they knew their man, and may ere long give him a little more law and be instrumental in meting out to him salutary justice, with a plentiful supply of hard labour to balance the accounts they already have against him. If there are any doubting Thomases as to the extent of this fearful trade, I would strongly recommend them to visit Lemon Street Police Station, where if they have proper authority to put questions, that clever officer, Chief Inspector Wensley, will soon tell them of the awfulness of the situation and the crying urgency that exists for speedy remedies in the shape of parliamentary enactments that would give the authorities a strong arm to speedily stop and perhaps kill the illicit trade of traffic in white women. Almost weekly, glaring cases of the traffic in young girls who are taken abroad come under the notice of the Lemon Street Police, but in 9 cases out of 10 the police are powerless. Now and again they do succeed in bringing home the terrible offence, but even when they do, the law deals mildly with the offender. It is, indeed, a fact that the pimp who breaks the heart, the health, and every hope on earth of a white girl, and who lives on her awful earnings in London is, when caught, which is seldom, treated far more leniently than a women's franchise enthusiast who emphasises her parliamentary inequality by breaking a window or two. As recently as April 14th this year, one of the numerous gang who are living on the ill earnings of unfortunate women was arraigned at Bow Street before Mr. Curtis Bennett, the sister of the pavement, who gave information to the police, complaining of the man's conduct in taking her immoral earnings from her, was a good-looking young English girl, about 25 years of age. She stated that she had known the accused bludger for about 15 months, and during that period, with the exception of some 6 weeks, he had lived on the money she had earned on the streets. As a rule, he never got out of bed till about midday, and he had a fearful aversion to work. Sometimes, when she had no money to give him, he beat her most unmercifully. The result was that she was black and blue. Finally, she left him, After that he wrote her letters threatening to kick her inside out if she did not send him money. It was quite true that this wretch had given her diamond rings, but he had purchased them with money she had made on the streets. The woman told the magistrate that she had given this bludger as much as £12 within a week, and that he had only given her a few coppers when she went out in the evening to look for more money. The unfortunate woman declared that she stood in hourly terror of the man's brutality. The magistrate asked if the accused were a foreigner, and Detective Sergeant Broadhurst replied, "No, sir, I wish he were." The magistrate, "So do I." The brute received sentence of 3 months for living on the results of the woman's prostitution, and 3 months for beating her when she had no money to give him. This is one of the cases where the bludger is caught and dealt with under the authority of the law, and, as the law now stands, this human monster is penalised in about half the sentence he would have received for breaking a plate glass window if he had belonged to the Suffragette League, or if he had not belonged to any league, but simply as a matter of getting money easily had stolen a policeman's watch, for which no British court would have given him less than 12 months. But for living on the prostitution of an unfortunate woman who was forced to sell her body to men and her mind to the devil, this bludger gets 3 months, and 3 months for beating and kicking her when she has no money to give him. A case is recorded at Lemon Street against 2 oily-tongued wretches, young Jews, good-looking, well-dressed, and apparently free with money, who decoyed 2 handsome girls, both Jews, and I am told both well-behaved. These girls were trapped at Whitechapel and shipped off to that fearful burial ground for thousands of our girls. Buenos Aires. The police showed me the photographs of these girls. They were well developed and comely. I also saw the picture of the pimps. One would take them to be anything but pimps. The method they adopted to decoy these girls is the old story. Fine clothes, silk stockings, a castle to live in, and servants to fan you. However, there was a noise about the disappearance of these girls. The Lemon Street police got on their track, and as sufficient evidence was forthcoming, a warrant was granted. Chief Inspector Wensley had the matter in hand, and the men were arrested in Buenos Aires, extradited back, and convicted. One, named Cohen, received 12 months. The other, named Gold, 15 months. Probably both names were assumed. The girls were restored to their parents. These men were only 2 of the many traffickers in girl flesh, and how many girls they took off to Buenos Aires before they were caught, heaven only knows. Some cases that have come directly under police observation demonstrate the dreadful, deadly infatuation that often binds thoughtless, foolish girls to the pimp. The police support the theory that girls are frequently hypnotized by the strong willpower or animal magnetism of some of these wretched pimps. An officer of the police, a man of the highest repute, pointed out a case to me where a pimp waited months and months to get proper control over his victim, who was a good girl. For a long time the fiend incarnate contented himself with merely walking out with the girl, taking her to cheap picture shows, buying her little presents and articles of clothing, meeting her as she came home from work, giving her tea and sweets, and doing everything that would take her mind off his villainy. But the fearful endgame came when his willpower mastered her mind. Once he had taught her to trust him, to love him, to watch and wait for his coming, he ruined her and then ruthlessly dumped her into the inferno at Buenos Aires, where she poisoned herself. A very pathetic case is recorded at Whitechapel Station, that of a nice-looking girl who was a hard worker, well-behaved, and who tried hard to live a proper life. Many of the pimps endeavoured to catch her, to send her abroad, but she was too shy and coy for them to master. At last, however, she fell to the wiles of an old she-devil who keeps a shop at Whitechapel. This woman, a noted procuress, introduced the girl to an old reprobate whose only business is procuring girls for the South American trade. The old hound was called Uncle by some persons. By others he was more affectionately termed Papa. He caught this young girl in his meshes with the assistance of the procuress, and by means of fine promises she was taken to Buenos Aires. to fill the duties of a barmaid at startling wages, but on landing she was simply dumped into a bad house. The missus of the den of iniquity, with, of course, assistance, did the rest. The girl's clothes were taken from her, and she was ill-treated and half-starved. The missus, growing tired of the girl's nonsense, as she termed it, reserved this unfortunate who was fighting not only to protect her honour, but also her health, for the roughest of the rough breed of men. When these men came to town from their far-off cattle ranches in the country to see life, the missus would introduce them half-drunken and boisterous, fearing neither God, devil, nor man, to this unfortunate girl, Miss B. In consequence of the fearful knocking about this girl received, she became almost a wreck in health, broken in heart and spirit, and was penniless, friendless, alone in a hell upon earth in a strange country. By some means she had a note conveyed to the British consul at Buenos Aires. That worthy gentleman lost no time in visiting the house, and, with the authority of his position, rescued her, treated her with all Christian humanity, gave her clothes and medical attention, and caused her to be returned to England. She came back to her native land, not the bright, healthy girl she left it, but a derelict of womanhood, broken in mind and in body. I dare not mention her name, it would be cruel to do so, but her photograph and the record of her case is with a great pile of such cases at Lemon Street. Poor girl, murdered by a system that allows trafficking in human flesh in a great Christian country like England. What of the thousands upon thousands who die unknown, uncared for, unassisted? They die off as the flowers of the field, and no real effort is made to save them or bring their destroyers to justice. They are, of course, alas, the daughters of the poor. In the case of Miss B, I have quoted, nothing was done to the missus of the house, nor was the old pimp called Uncle leg-armed to stop him from destroying more girls. Such is the law. Such is the hypocrisy of our dealing with this subject that everybody but the pimp and the missus wants to avoid the unclean thing of trafficking in white women. Quite recently, this old uncle, whose more appropriate name would be Old Nick, was seen by two Lemon Street detectives on an outgoing boat bound for the Argentine, with two young girls, good-looking Jews, bound for that bourne from which few white girls ever return, unless broken in health, and their bodies in such a state as to force them to pray for death. The officers knew the fate of these girls, but they were powerless to interfere with the liberty of the subject. So the ship sailed with its human freight, and the pimp laughed at the inglorious laws of glorious England. Another very painful case was unfolded to me at Lemon Street. It was the same old story with, however, this variation. The culprits were caught red-handed and were promptly landed in jail. An old beldam, it is alleged, enticed into her shop a pretty young Jew, a daughter of southern Europe. She, poor child, was another daughter of the poor. When, indeed, may we ask, do procuresses or pimps interfere with the daughters of the rich or the powerful? Very seldom. It is the daughters of the poor always who are sacrificed on the altar of sensuality. It is the daughters of the poor who are decoyed, waylaid, trapped, ruined, and damned to satisfy the animal cravings of animal man. But to proceed, this young girl, not yet 16 years old, girls of southern Europe develop quicker than the children of the West, was enticed by this old beldam, who systematically set to work to poison the girl's mind by holding before her a dazzling mirror reflecting beautiful finery and adornments that might be obtained by the child consenting to receive a lover who loved her for herself. The next step of the beldam was to hand the girl over to the pimp to prepare her for the life she was to follow. He took the child to his rooms and kept her almost a strict prisoner for days. When he considered her sufficiently tamed, he sought out one of his chums, to whom he imparted the information of the treasure he had secured for a good customer abroad. The chum was taken by the pimp to inspect the child, and after a few days all three seemed to be fast friends. Eventually, however, the two men quarrelled as to who should have final possession of the child. The police had suspected that each wanted her for shipment, and when news of the quarrel came to their ears, the old woman and one of the men were arrested and committed for trial. The second man took to his heels and is now hiding in Amsterdam. Happily, the girl was rescued, but her story is fearfully painful. In this case, much credit is due to the effective manner in which the Lemon Street police pounced upon and jailed the ruffians. Another very bad case, which occurred quite recently, came under the notice of the Lemon Street officials. A certain German Jew living in the neighbourhood of Whitechapel had such a strong aversion to working for his own living that he hit upon a plan, unfortunately not by any means new or singular, of living without work. He married a young, handsome girl, a Jew, and then bundled her off to Buenos Aires as a married woman to earn her living and remit to him money whereby he might live without work. He did not mind if she sent him the wages of sin, the wages of pleasure, or the wages of thieving, so long as she was prompt with her remittances. Weak-minded, she obeyed her husband's orders and led a life of shame. She hardly ever failed to remit a good part of her earnings to the man who had sworn to protect her, but her health gave way under the abominable life. So she gathered all the money and worldly goods she could muster, and, broken in health through disease and debauch, landed back at Whitechapel. The monster, whom she called husband, was at first all kindness and consideration. He proposed that they should buy a shop with her money and end their days in peace. The woman agreed. They bought the shop, and she paid over her devil's counters as the purchase money. But the shop stood in the husband's name. Naturally, this was his first concern. Once all was secure, this man-devil brutally told his wife that she must go on the streets and earn something to keep the home together. The unhappy woman, now broken in health and suffering torments of pain, refused to further damn her soul, more especially as a young, dark-eyed recruit to the Sisterhood of the Pavement was then serving her probationary course with the husband. In despair, the wretched wife appealed to the authorities, but alas for our laws, which have taken centuries to make through our parliamentary system, nothing could be done to help the woman, because, it seems, the delightful point as to the validity of a wife's evidence given against her husband, though a contemptible pimp he may be, has not been finally settled. A celebrated test case under this head is now before the High Court, and will probably remain there until it is forgotten, or until the schedule of wronged women and wrecked lives is multiplied by 3. Another human monstrosity at Whitechapel, answering to the name of Man, married his own cousin and sent her forth to battle in the Argentine and remit her earnings to him. The police suspect this fellow of afterwards marrying another girl and sending her out to Buenos Aires to follow the same evil course mapped out by him for wife number 1. Chief Inspector Wensley showed me the photograph of 2 pretty-looking girls who had been kidnapped in France and brought to this country for immoral purposes. Luckily for the youngsters, the Lemon Street authorities got wind of the affair, rescued the girls, and sent them back to their sorrowing parents. The pimp, of course, took to his heels, so the nauseating record goes on ad nauseum. Still nothing done by those responsible for the laws of the country to protect girls, or indeed to protect children. We hear of enthusiasts at Westminster bringing in bills for every conceivable object except the protection of the daughters of the poor. We read of bills being presented to prevent youths of 14, 15 and 16 years of age selling newspapers in London streets to earn a crust, often a dry and hard crust. But whilst the bill takes the crust out of the hands of those unfortunate youngsters, no proposal is made to replace it with wholesome bread and butter. Of course, the youngsters have no votes. Some have no homes, so naturally they must accept what Parliament enacts for them and abandon the paper-selling business for that of thieving. One of the main difficulties the police encounter in dealing with the machinations of the pimp when he is beginning his trade of trafficking in women is the evil spring from which much misery flows. The difficulty under the existing law is to convict men of the pimp class who live and fatten on the earnings of women of ill fame. All the intelligent heads of the great police organisation in England will tell you plainly that if you stop men from living on the earnings of these unfortunate women, you will strike a death blow at the taproot of the now flourishing tree of evil. One worthy chief inspector remarked to me that at present it is a mighty hard job to convict a man who is really known to live well, dress well, attend race meetings, theatres, and the like on the wages of sin. Convictions are difficult, excepting in the very rare cases where the unfortunate woman will give voluntary evidence against the pimp. Under the law as it now exists, the police must actually have the woman's evidence, or must see money passed from her to him, or have definite evidence to that effect. I have known quite a young girl, a police officer told me, to take her nightly earnings home to her bludger, and often get a good hiding for not bringing more. Still the woman would not give the wretch away. I begged of her to let me put him inside. The poor creature shook her head and remarked that if she did, he would kill her when he came out. Sometimes jealousy will prompt an unfortunate to give her brutal master away, but not frequently. I have in mind one brutal bludger, well known to the police, who actually follows his missus around Leicester Square and takes her earnings from her as she, poor fallen creature, earns them. This brute has been known to bite his wife in the street in his struggle to get from her hand the few pieces of silver she had just earned. Still, we are powerless under the law to punish such a monster. The power the police want and should have is the power to arrest any known pimp who is living on the earnings of the unfortunate woman, and let the onus of proof that he is not so living rest with the man so detained. That is what is done under our game laws. If a man is seen coming off the grounds of some lordly manor under suspicious circumstances, he is liable to be arrested and convicted, and frequently is so arrested and convicted, even though no feather, fur, or flesh be found upon him. Under the Prevention of Poaching Act, 1862, it is not necessary to prove or even suggest that a suspect has actually committed an act of poaching, and in certain cases suspected persons may be searched by police officers without a warrant, and any supposed incriminating articles in the possession of the suspected persons may be seized. If the protection of game on great estates is worthy of attention, surely the fearful subject now under review is 1,000 times more important in the public interest. The very fact of an idle vagabond being known to live with a public harlot should be sufficient evidence that he is living with a woman for gain, and not for love or for sentiment. And if he could be severely handled by the law for openly living in a house of ill fame, or living at all with one of the unfortunates of the pavement, whether she be his wife or not, a bold and heavy stroke would be aimed at the taproot of the whole trouble. Is that where we should commence? Yes.